Welcome to another episode of how I built my own track spikes. To start off, let's talk about the last episode where I showed off the compressed air cushions that I plan to put in the midsole of my spikes. So since that video, I have discovered that even the most well-sealed of my airbags still lose pressure over time. This is unfortunate, but it wasn't too surprising since the bags were 3D printed, which can leave small gaps between each 3D printed line. So I tried coating the bag in Flex Seal to see if that would seal off all the remaining air gaps. And it did cause the bag to maintain pressure for a little bit longer, but it still wasn't enough. And I decided, what if I tried using a little bit more of a generous coating, and it still lost pressure, although a little more slowly. Maybe I just need a really thick coat of Flex Seal, but I figured that Flex Seal itself just might not be 100% airtight. These liquid rubbers cure with exposure to air, so the top layer, which cures first, will leave the bottom liquid layer underneath, which still cures, and that means air is probably permeating through the top layer to cure the bottom layer. And this would mean that Flex Seal, the cured Flex Seal, isn't totally airtight, which is why I haven't also tried using just the regular dipping Flex Seal. I have just been using Flex Seal spray, which might leave its own kind of air gaps. I hope to keep trying different coatings of the airbags to see if I can get something 100% airtight like a curable resin, but until then I won't be able to use these in my spikes. So until this point, I was planning on using the airbags to compensate for a lack of quality cushion in the kind of foams that I already had on hand. I still have not found high quality EVA foam that I can just cut from a sheet into whatever shape that I want. But I figured if I could find cheap foam in cheap sandals, I might be able to find higher quality foam in some higher quality sandals. So I purchased a few different foam slides, and I settled on this one from Under Armour, which is a little bit firmer and more responsive. I was sure to order these in the largest sizes I could because I'd be carving out my own midsole shape from inside of it. At first, I tried using a razor and a saw, but the razor would dull too quickly and the saw wasn't totally accurate enough and it wouldn't leave a clean surface underneath. So I also tried to use a Dremel, but this would leave just too much dust, and I got real tired of that really quick. So eventually I settled on the hot wire cutter with some nichrome wire, a few nuts and bolts, some plywood, and a 12-volt power supply. I had something that could cut the foam a little more cleanly than the other methods. This was still prone to some mistakes, but I do have a solution I'll probably implement in future midsoles that I'll be cutting. Now, with my midsoles crudely cut from a pair of shower slides, I finally had a midsole I could work with, which was probably the biggest roadblock in this project so far. I already had an upper and a spike plate designed and ready to 3D print, but I did have to redesign the upper for the 5th time after seeing how poorly the 4th version fit my foot. It was as simple as changing a few angles and dimensions, and I also implemented just a couple features that will save a tiny bit of weight. Now, in a previous video, I talked about how the upper has to adhere to the midsole in a way that doesn't let it peel off. If I pull on the upper kind of perpendicular to the surface it's glued to, it'll peel off pretty easily. But if I pull on the upper in a more parallel fashion to the surface that it is glued to, then it's not going to peel off so easily. So I needed the upper to kind of touch the midsole in a way where it was parallel to the midsole coming off of it. I previously tried giving the midsole a lip at the edge to make sure the upper smoothly transitioned off of the midsole, but I couldn't really find a way to practically cut this out of the foam. But since I'm 3D printing the upper, I figured I could just give the upper 2 edges that could both adhere to the midsole. Both of these edges glue onto the midsole like so and give me the parallel force that I described earlier, and the other edge just makes it easier to glue onto the correct spot and it gives it just a little more surface adhesion. So this solution isn't the prettiest. The glue is kind of messy and it shows right on the outside of the shoe. And also, if I scuff my shoes together while running, I might damage the upper's adherence to the shoe. I would still like to give the midsole a lip like I described earlier, but this will do for now. Like I said, I had a spike plate ready to 3D print. This 13th version of the spike plate ditched the lateral curve, the lateral side-to-side curve that would supposedly give me a smooth transition as I pronate upon striking the ground. This feature was inspired by basically every spike I see in the market, but I didn't have a way to practically shape the midsole in a way that would receive a curved spike plate that was curved side to side. I also wanted to print the spike plate completely flat to save on nylon 3D printing filament material. Now the plate still needed a front to back bend, which I achieved by placing the spike plate on a curved piece of aluminum and just using a heat gun to make it match the curve of the aluminum. I also did this with the midsole because the toe spring would be pretty flat otherwise, and this was something I could achieve unlike the lateral side-to-side curve. So after gluing on the spike plate, the upper, and then adding some laces that were way too long, I also bought some cheap 3mm insoles and I cut those to shape to fit into the shoe, and I glued on the nylon heel traction. And then the shoe is a wearable prototype. After over a year when I started this project, I finally have a wearable prototype, and I hope you are all excited to see how it fares on the track. I have kept my expectations in check since I have never built any shoes before, but hey, I'm excited, and I hope you are too. So if you don't want to miss the next video where I test these out for the first time, be sure to subscribe. But until then, I've been Will Stahl, and maybe stop wearing elf shoes.